Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network, and today's topic is the drift of sleepwalking through our lives, through routine that swallows us and that allows us to go to sleep through our lives. So we're going to talk about how we can disrupt the drift. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. It's so great to have you here with us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Before we get started talking about the drift, we're going to take a couple minutes to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your molecules, all your cells, all your electrons, and creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So today we're talking about the drift, and there's a comfort of routine that lots of us slide into, often unconsciously, where we kind of sleepwalk through life. Right? We have certain ways that we do things, so we don't have to be really engaged in them. And we kind of go on automatic pilot. And we often do this with our thinking too, where we don't really consider a lot of the things that we tend to think, or we don't really so this is actually a really good direction, I think. I've mentioned Carol Sanford and her school of thought, the Fourth Way School. It's got a long lineage. She's not the originator, but she's been carrying the torch in a wonderful way. Anyway, one of the distinctions that is made in the school is thoughting instead of thinking. So maybe that should have been the title for today, but what's the distinction? Oftentimes we have thoughts, or we are, maybe we're had by thoughts that we don't even consider. We don't necessarily even know where they came from, and yet we reiterate them in an almost automatic way, or maybe in an actually automatic way. And we're not actively thinking, we're not considering, we're not examining these thoughts that have us. And we can contrast that to thinking. Thinking is an act where we're in an inquiry, where we have the potential to generate something new. So when we look at thoughting rather than thinking, what comes to mind is the prejudices that we have, the preferences. They're not the same, preferences and prejudices, but we inherit many thoughts from our families, our culture, and this inheritance is something that is rather invisible to us because we just accept it as that's the way it is. And this goes back to the conversation on spells, because we're indoctrinated. We're given the parameters of reality and experience. We're told who we are. We're told what we're like. We're told what our potentials are. We're indoctrinated, and most of, or many of those things remain unexamined. And I really love this distinction of spells or programs rather than limiting beliefs, because limiting beliefs, when we talk about beliefs, it makes us take a level of ownership of those beliefs, and we tend to identify with them. In other words, we tend to have those beliefs be part of our identity, versus if we think about a program or a spell, we can recognize that it's not us. So I was having a conversation with a client who has some pretty intense spells. I imagine most of us do. Some pretty intense spells that have reached into every part of her life. And in her case, part of that spell casting was from her church, and having to do with unworthiness, or and that brings up the thought that in Christianity, the first thing in a lot of traditions that people are taught is that they're a sinner. Talk about a spell, right? So to be told you're a sinner and that you essentially can't be redeemed, that's one big spell to be looking at. And the drift that we're talking about today is that so many of these spells remain unquestioned, unchallenged, unidentified, and they become sort of the wheelwork of our culture and foundational to our lives and the way that we express and the way that we interact with ourselves and each other and all the other beings on the planet and in the universe, for that matter. So the question is, How do we wake up from the drift? Another way of thinking about this is being a fish in water. When these thoughts remain unexamined, when our experience and our assumptions and our prejudices are unexamined, then they own us rather than us generating them. Good morning, Dido. So good to have you here with us. Thanks for joining us. We're talking about the drift and how we typically don't even examine some of the thoughts that are foundational in our lives, the assumptions about ourselves, the assumptions about each other. And so much of this, it goes back to the spell casting that we've been talking about, where we have inherited all kinds of spells about the nature of life, the nature of being, about our own nature, about our own potentials. And then we live out of those things. So if we're told that we're not enough, or that we're flawed in certain ways, then that program, that spell seeps in, and we approach the world out of from within that container, that's how we show up in the world. We play it out. It's like, okay, we're in a play, here's your role. And then we play that role, and we never get to recognize that it was a role, that it's not who we are in our essence, in our truth. And so what can we do to wake ourselves up from the drift? I think one of the things, it's the biggest challenge is to be able to wake up enough to remember to do what we need to do to wake up. So perhaps one of the things that we get to do is to challenge ourselves to remember, to examine what is going on. Like where did, to ask ourselves where a thought originated, for example. Where a perspective originated. Who did that come from? Where did that come from? So in the work that I do with clients, sometimes they'll say, you know, I hear this voice, or I hear this message that I'm not good enough, and I will say, well, whose voice is it? Because oftentimes it's not our own voice that is giving us that message. And we somehow think or respond to these messages like they're an is. In other words, that they're a reality, that they're a truth, without allowing ourselves to question that. Or it's different to question something than it is to resist it. When we are resisting it, what we're doing is giving it credibility somehow. You know, we're assuming that it's true, and then we're fighting against it. And this might be a little nuanced, but I think it's a really important distinction. Try it on, see how it feels to you, if it feels different, to be questioning something versus resisting it. So if you tell me I'm not good enough and I assert, yes, I am, I'm resisting it versus being curious about, well, what's that mean? What, like testing it, looking at, is that true? Is it not true? What is it that, what does that even mean? Versus resisting it. If I resist it, there's a way that I'm giving it credence. There's a way that I'm taking ownership of it. The saying, what we resist persists. I'm having sort of a new insight around that at this moment, because when we resist something, we're complicit in affirming it. So that makes me think of when you're wanting somebody to do something, or you're wanting somebody to not do something, don't forget. You don't want somebody to forget, right? So we say, don't forget. And what our brain does is it first has to figure out how to forget so that it cannot do that. So that's another kind of spell in its way, to say, don't do that, because you're reinforcing the thing that you're not wanting. And that's kind of what we do on a very regular basis, casting spells on ourselves in a way, to be focusing on what we don't want. I don't want that to happen. So instead of focusing on what we do want, we're creating this affirmation through our resistance, or through our denial of the existence of that thing that we don't want. We're kind of bringing it into being. So Dido says that's a really profound distinction, coming from resistance versus curiosity about the thought. The resistance gives it a lot more energy. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I'm having an experience of that dynamic now that I've never really had before. I know that what we resist persists, but I'm getting this recognition about how that works, because we're validating it by resisting it. It's kind of exactly the opposite of the intention, right? So if I'm resisting being angry, then I have the anger and I have the resistance. I'm resisting feeling angry, or I'm resisting feeling sad. I have the sadness and I have the resistance. And the resistance is kind of energizing. As you said, Dido, the resistance gives it a lot of energy. It's actually energizing that thing we're resisting, which is really, really interesting. So the curiosity is kind of a high magic, I think. So maybe one of the ways we can wake ourselves from the drift is to notice. Every now and then we get the grace of a moment to notice what we're doing. and awaken to it in some way. So when we notice, perhaps we can notice with curiosity. One of the things that I see as a pattern for so many of us is that we see ourselves doing something that we don't like, and we criticize and we judge. And what is that doing? It's kind of a resistance, right? Rather than a curiosity. And the curiosity then allows for, it's like a lubricant somehow, and it allows for the negative impact of whatever that is to start dissolving, and untangles a dynamic oftentimes to be curious rather than in judgment, because judgment is another form of resistance, isn't it? It's so interesting. It's so interesting to actually really be feeling, having a felt understanding of this resistance galvanizing something, strengthening the thing that we're resisting. There's a different level of knowledge and understanding, different depth, when there's a felt sense of a knowing around something. I'm just fascinated by it right now, to recognize, oh wow, I see, I really have a different understanding of this. So Rosalind says, how can you play with going about your day to mirror a reflection of yourself to others? Looks like saying and doing things to affirm qualities in others which we want to cultivate in ourselves. Let me see if I can understand this. How can you play with going about your day to mirror a reflection of yourself to others? Looks like saying and doing things to affirm qualities in others which we want to cultivate in ourselves. Well, I think that's a really interesting dynamic too, is that we see in others things that we see that are parts of ourselves. So whether we see things that we appreciate in others or we see things that we don't appreciate in others, it's our own projection. We're able to recognize something in someone else because it is a reflection of ourselves also. Because we're the ones doing the recognizing, right? So we already have a presence to whatever that is. So for instance, if I notice how intelligent someone is, typically what we'll do is we'll compare ourselves, right? So we compare ourselves to, here's somebody who's so much smarter than I am, for example. And we'll compare ourselves, and oftentimes we'll say we're not doing really well in that comparison, right? Maybe they're so much smarter than I am, for example. Well, what's showing up around that is, if we get curious, is like, wow, what's going on with intelligence, and where do I have these ideas about my intelligence, or what I admire that intelligence? What is, what's driving that internal conversation? I think that if we're recognizing something in someone else, then we can recognize our potentials, or maybe our desire to be able to cultivate that in ourselves. We can be saying, oh, wow, that person's so much smarter than I am. We can say, well, what is it that makes them smarter? What is it that we're perceiving that makes them smarter? Are they smarter? Is it maybe confidence? Maybe they're more confident in expressing themselves. And maybe that's something that I can cultivate. Maybe they have a facility in putting thoughts together. And what's my facility with that? Maybe I think differently. Maybe I can get some deeper insight into my own process by that kind of inquiry. So maybe when we see a quality in someone else, we can say, well, how does that we appreciate, how does that show up in me? And I like the idea of using curiosity, the magic of curiosity, to expand ourselves and our capacities. And even just to recognize ourselves and our capacities in a curious rather than a judgmental way. So let's wake ourselves from the drift. Let's notice when we've been sleeping. Let's come alive to life so that we can just enjoy it more fully. Anyway, that's it for today. So I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite you to please check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And it is always my privilege and joy to have these conversations together and maybe discover new ways of thinking and being, and that bring us more vitality and fulfillment. So until next time.